Hello everybody, welcome to the island of Mallorca. Richie Prior. I am with world famous DJ,
if you like.
You are, come on, you've tell us. You've been around a long time in the DJ world. That doesn't mean to say that you're old. You started very young.
I did start very young, but I am quite old. I've been DJing 35 years. I started when I was 16. And I am astonished, really, that I'm still incredibly busy as a DJ, notwithstanding in the last few months, which have been unprecedented times for anybody who does anything in the public sort of sphere. But apart from that, been very busy right throughout those 35 years.
What people may not know about you, and I have to hold my hands up and say I didn't, that you are a qualified lawyer.
I am. I haven't always been a qualified lawyer. I have been for about the last 10 years. I've got a practice in London, in King's Cross, specialising, surprise, in music, with a particular emphasis on dance music. But I do across the spectrum of the music industry. So I have kind of two jobs now. I've had two jobs for the best part of 10 years. It was kind of, dare I say it, intended to be a sort of exit plan from DJing. Not that I wanted to exit DJing, but there was nobody or not many people older than me to serve as kind of a role model, and therefore I didn't know how long the work would keep on coming in. And I think anybody that sees me will know I love what I do, and I think I don't think you can lie about that. You're either dead into it and you're a sort of you're a very competent and very connected performer, or you're not, and I'm definitely in the former category. And for that reason, last year 2019 was my largest number of gigs in about a decade, and this year would have been even more than that if it wasn't for COVID. So but in the meantime, I thought, well, I don't know what's going to go on in the future. I re-qualified as a solicitor, went through another law firm, went to where I am now. Things are going really well, so I've got this kind of dual existence, which sound really chalk and cheese, but actually they're not necessarily wholly chalk and cheese, because it's purely music focused what I do.
Now, also, I do know the fact that you have the longest running residency. Judgment Night in Ibiza is the longest running residency. I know you had a break, but it is the longest running residency in Ibiza, which for a place like Ibiza, the party town, or you could say of the world, is a great achievement.
Yeah, I mean, again, there were a lot of kind of reasons for doing it, promoting it. There are certain residencies that occur in the clubs where the club sort of buys into the brand, if you like, whereas I was promoting there for most of that time, printing flyers, doing all the rest of it, which was good in many respects. Notwithstanding the fact it's a kind of an amazing branding exercise, simultaneously being on Radio 1 and for most of the same time in kind of shadowing one another, having a high profile residency in Ibiza is great for keeping people's awareness of what you're doing in life very strong. But on a deeper level, actually running a business there forced me to learn Spanish really very competently, and just made me feel more than just a sort of imposter, because there are these people who turn up, DJs who turn up, take the cash, fist pump a lot, rock the house and go home and kind of take the money elsewhere, whereas I was very much keeping the money in the island, generating jobs. I've got a property there, kind of doing it up, feeling part of the culture. I mean, it's obviously, in terms of what I do, I live in London. Most of the music business, certainly in Europe, is centred in London, and therefore I couldn't be a full-time resident of the Baleares, but I'm about as full-time a part-timer as it's possible to be.
And you now, obviously, you've come here to Mallorca as well. You've got a property here in Mallorca. You obviously had Judgment Night at BCM as well.
Yeah.
And BCM is going through a big change. I don't know if
I've seen the outside. Yeah.
I've seen the inside. It's going to be amazing. It is going to be absolutely amazing. I think it's going to be a club that you obviously want to go to. Do you know what I mean? It's going to be so different. I think it's more Ibiza for us than it was before, if that makes sense.
Is it sort of lower capacity but more
VIP and everything? Yeah, it's definitely going to be like that. Definitely. So, 2019 was your busiest year, you say. We've moved out of 2019 to 2020. Then all of a sudden, lockdown.
Yeah.
What has happened to the music industry? What is going to happen in the future, since that all happened in March?
Well, I mean, I can tell you about the situation now in August 2020, where I've got 4 socially distanced gigs coming up this month. I don't know the exact mechanics of how they're being socially distanced, but I know they're all agreed with the respective local authorities. One's in Maidstone, one's in Manchester, one's in Lancashire, and one's in Norwich. So those are the 4 I'm doing. They've all got a kind of socially distanced way of doing things. I think maybe you come with your group, you don't go outside your group, people come and serve drinks to the area that you're in. It's kind of, I believe a couple of them have kind of painted things out a bit like a football pitch and that sort of lining. So it's all very different. So that's the here and now. I mean, there's so much to say about really in relation to COVID, because I know in Spain it's happened a lot, and in the UK there's been over 500 illegal raves during the period of lockdown. And the reality is you cannot stop kids going out and socialising, and you hear these tremendously emotional debates on the subject saying that kids are being selfish. But to me, I'm not 18 to 25 and I haven't broken lockdown and I've done what I've been told to do, but if I was 18 to 25 right now, I wouldn't have somebody telling me I couldn't go out in relation to a disease that didn't directly affect me. And I understand it's a bit deeper than that, of course, but because that's when you're going out, you're, dare I say, you're having sex, you're coupling up, you're kind of, you've got a huge social circle. It's when life is absolutely at its peak from a social perspective. So it really, really cheeses me off when I hear people, and it doesn't matter if you turn on the radio, if you look at the comment sections about stories in the press, you have conversations with people, you hear it on TV, people saying how selfish the sort of under 30s are being and jeopardising the health of those who are over 30. But I just don't think it's being realistic. I think you've got to take what the human condition and humanity is about, and at that age people are going to go and socialise. You cannot shove it under the carpet. You can't say, well, we are just going to tell you not to go out until COVID is gone. It's just impossible. So what you've got to do is try and do it in a socially distanced, sensible way. Yes, of course, there will always be some kids for whom the kind of allure of the rave, the allure of something illegal, sort of beats everything. But at the moment, people's attitude is just, it's a bit like the attitude towards drugs. You know, it's not a conversation we can have. They're wrong. They're wrong. Don't do it. Going out and socialising and hanging out with other people of your age is wrong. Don't do it. You're wasting your breath. You've got to think of a constructive way forward. And I know that issue has sort of raised its ugly head in Spain, and culturally Spain is a bit different. I don't like to use the expression police state because that's not fair, but it's more of there's certainly a different relationship between the public and the police from the relationship that exists in the UK, and therefore it's impossible to you can't simply lock people up forever. Now in the Baleares, as we know, as has been well publicised in terms of the clubs in Ibiza, they closed down the clubs very early, which I thought was quite negative where outdoor clubs are concerned, because it's quite clear that catching coronavirus outdoors is quite difficult. I think the evidence, if you want to use a bit of poignant UK-based evidence, 2 months ago or thereabouts, there were loads and loads of Black Lives Matter demonstrations. You only need to look at the media footage to see that a lot of people weren't wearing masks. Was there a spike in coronavirus cases? No, there wasn't as a consequence of it. Why? Because the people were outside. I mean, I'm not a scientist, but that's fairly clear empirical evidence. So to try and tell people they can't go out outdoors is OTT, which I suppose leads one on to the argument about the Balearic Islands and making outdoor wearing of masks mandatory, which I found a bit silly, but maybe in the broader scheme of things, now we've got this kind of quarantine situation on their hands, maybe it's good that the Balearic Islands have kind of gone above and beyond to demonstrate the fact that they're actually safer than the UK. So dare I say, I specialise in giving relatively snappy answers, and it's not one that one can give a snappy answer about.
So before lockdown, the plans for you for the summer were working Monday to Thursday, maybe doing your lawyer's work, Thursday through to Sunday you would be doing your DJing, you'd be DJing just in Spain and UK, or would you be going off around the world?
Well, mainly Spain and UK. I might do the odd sort of Greece, the odd Iron Napa, but basically festival and resort gigs, plus a few gigs with my band as well in some of those settings.
Because that was a new thing you brought in last year. You brought in like an orchestra type of.
Well, it's more like a band. It's like a 10-piece band, which is it's like playing a mashup of different tracks with a lot of live sort of funky stuff on top, and that was beginning to go really well. So all of it's on ice at the moment, notwithstanding the fact that I am actually doing my first gigs this month for 5 months effectively.
So you yourself probably won't change what you do. I take it you're going to be doing what you do. It's what happens down in the crowd that's going to be changing.
Yeah, I mean, well, the extent to which I have changed is I've been doing live streaming DJ sets every Saturday night, which have got millions now of views over the course of the months, which is a bit odd. We've developed the kind of technological side of it. So I've got a kind of green screen and got silly backgrounds, and I can do it floating in space, do it on a desert island, and all you've got me is me and the decks in front of the scenery. And I kind of did it like a radio show. I do it 9 p.m. UK time for 90 minutes every Saturday night, and so that's a total change for me. I've been doing podcasts and syndicated radio throughout the period since I ceased to be on Radio 1, but I've never done kind of streamed audio-visual DJ sets before. They've gone down really, really well. But no, where it comes to the DJ gigs, I mean, I guess I'm going to be up there on stage, playing some tunes, having a couple of drinks, prancing around like a bit of a fool. It's the way they've laid the crowd out in front of me that will have varied.
So you think you might have to change, because obviously how you sort of work with the crowd, because obviously I imagine it's important for a DJ to have the crowd working or knowing that you're feeding off the energy they're bringing to you, right? That's going to, so this might change the way you do things. I don't know. I mean, you're not going to know until you get there, I suppose.
I'm really not. I can go out to up to March 2020. I could go out to gigs and know that there are a few variables. You might be in a bigger or a smaller event. You might be in a club or be in a festival. You might be in a location where they've, rather irritating from my perspective, really create quite a distance between you and the crowd, or you might, as far as my preference is concerned, have put the decks really close to the crowd so you can kind of see the whites of their eyes. But those are the only variables. Now, who knows the way it's going to be laid out? But but I think I suspect, notwithstanding the fact that there's a certain section of society have been, I believe, disproportionately scared by government propaganda, because I'm a firm believer in, yes, one needs to be concerned about COVID, but some of the propaganda that has been put out has scared people beyond what's reasonable. Because if you're under 50, only 2% of COVID deaths have been amongst under 50s. And probably statistically, and another reality is if you're under 50 this year, you were as likely to die in an accident as you were to die of COVID. So, but the reality is some people remain very scared, and hopefully that won't discourage people from going out. The events are all much smaller capacity than they used to be. Events that might have been 3,000 to 5,000 are now probably 500 to 1,000, because you need to allow that much more space. And beyond that, I'll kind of turn up and try and assimilate myself as quickly as I possibly can. What's
going to, obviously what you're now learning about happening in the UK, is that going to, change here in the Balearics? You're doing these gigs, you're going to find out. That could be the learning curve for us, because obviously right now, every single club, pretty much every single bar is now closed in the Balearics. They put this rule out that we can't open our doors, and we need to do something in order to get from where we are right now, which is August, till when we open again in April next year. But listen, I could come up with hundreds of ideas how I think this could be done, but maybe you too, but I'm not quite sure the government are coming up with these ideas. So let us know.
I think part of it is whether the government have got this this absolute preoccupation with the so-called tourism of excess, and I haven't quite worked out how Ibiza fits into all of this. Whether they consider sort of Arenal for the German market and kind of Magaluf, maybe to a lesser extent some bits of Santa Ponza to be tourism of excess, or whether they consider kind of club culture to be tourism of excess. I mean, if they do consider club culture to be undesirable, and of course tourism of excess as far as the Balearic government is concerned is very undesirable, which is so simplistic and is its own paragraph that we should probably discuss. But if they do consider club culture to be tourism of excess, then Ibiza's got a very major problem on its hands, and I see an enormous amount of tension between the sort of central Balearic government and the local Ibiza government, because as much as the Ibizencans don't want to be wholly reliant on clubs, it's their point of differentiation. If you want to compare Ibiza and Mallorca, Mallorca's got a lot more history, much older buildings, mountains, scenery, It's got a major city. It's got a major football team. Dare I say it?
Sort of.
But it's so there's a lot. The kind of variety of what Mallorca has to offer is much greater. But Ibiza's got these legendary clubs that are absolutely a reason why people want to go to Ibiza. You know, Ibiza's got a lot of really good restaurants, some great bars, sunsets, some really good hotels, good villas to rent. But really, the point, tourism is like a product. It's like selling Wall's ice cream versus Tesco ice cream, if you like. Poor analogy, perhaps, but ultimately you are competing with other tourist destinations. Yes, you've got some devotees that will only go to one particular place and go there year in, year out. But if you speak to most people will kind of test one place and then go somewhere the next year. They don't automatically want to go to the same location, and therefore you need to look at what you have as a location compared to your competitors, whether your competitors be in Spain, be they the Canary Islands, or whether your competitors are in the Greek islands, or whether they're in Turkey, or but I would strongly recommend that the government of the Baleares, towards the end of the season, they want to be doing it this year, if they can, if COVID allows it, get on a plane and go and visit all these other places before they start making judgments about what they have here, because you need to understand that what you have, by its very nature, being an island dweller gives you a sort of insular mentality whereby you're not necessarily seeing the world as the rest of the world views itself. But it's just so important to treat every tourist destination as a competitive product and go and see what others are doing. Because in Croatia right now, they are rubbing their hands together. You know, unfortunately, Croatia's had a bit of a spike in coronavirus, which is arguably has prevented them from sort of capitalising on the woes that are occurring with the kind of nightlife-based industry here in the Baleares. But they're rubbing their hands together because if you try and shunt a huge spending market out and say, no, you can't go to clubs, and you don't give an alternative, you don't think of and you start passing out messages, which the local government have done here, saying, well, this might apply to 2021 as well, then other people will come and take that market very gratefully. Again, it doesn't take me to state it's out there. It's in the open that the youth market, the under 30s, have a much greater spending capacity than the family market does, because families have got mortgages, they've got the expensive kids, the middle class families have probably got school fees to pay. All the rest of it, whereas the under 30s, the unmarried market, just have way more money to spend. So yes, they are younger, they can't take their drink, they maybe drink more, but really be careful what you wish for.
You touched on what you thought might be the situation in Ibiza with the clubs in reference to the sort of the excessive tourism. I think that what the problem the Ibiza clubs are going to have is the volume of people. Do you know what I mean? Because obviously, how many people? I don't know, because you know, I'm not of the age of a clubbing person anymore, unfortunately. But places like Amnesia and privileged places, like we're talking thousands here, aren't we? So how are they going to be socially at the moment? Like with the gigs you're doing, how are they going to socially distance these people? I think that is more of the problem than the excessive tourism right now in Ibiza. Here obviously in Mallorca, the biggest club we have is BCM. I can't remember, I think that's 4,000 or 5,000 people maybe you can get into BCM. So there will be the problem on the one hand. The excessive tourism, I think, is another subject that is obviously a big subject right now because of the situation we have in Magaluz, Punta Baena. So there's two sides here. But what I think the authorities need to be looking at, as you just said, we've got to find a solution right now, because right now we're in a state of flux. Nobody really knows what's going on. Nobody really knows, are we going to be able to open in 2021? Nobody knows. But people need to prepare. People need to find out what they are going to be able to be doing. You know, that's the important thing. So let's touch on the club side of it first of all then. What are they going to be able to do in places like Ibiza?
Well, I think it's difficult because how testing evolves between now and then is still pretty unknown. I mean, if we get to a situation of kind of rapid testing coming in and coming out of countries, and even coming in and out of nightclubs, that could be a solution that negates the need for social distancing. Mm-hmm. It's been in the British media in the last sort of 48 hours that they've created a test that can give you a much more rapid response. how cheap that form of testing is, I've got no idea, but the fact that they can actually turn it around more quickly suggests that there's been an evolution in testing speed. So will there be a vaccine? Assuming that there isn't a vaccine for next summer, will there be better treatments, thereby reducing the mortality rate? Well, of course, that's already happened with the discovery of a couple of drugs that are already out there, have already been tested, so we know that. And then the testing issue. If you can test people quickly, assuming that coronavirus is still around, then is social distancing such a thing? So there are just too many variables. The problem with talking about those variables and not having an answer is that many, and I know this because I've got rental properties in the Baleares. I know that people book their holidays a year in advance, or people booking their, especially this year when people have had their holidays curtailed in 2020, people are already transferring those bookings to 2021 and making those bookings, whether that's because they've got kind of credits with the holiday companies or with the airlines, probably a bit of that, a bit of wanting the kind of light at the end of the tunnel to know, well, if I haven't been able to enjoy my Mediterranean break this year, I want to go and do it next year, etc. But each of the islands, I know less about Menorca. I've only been there a couple of times, and I know it has a slightly different offering, and it's kind of more family orientated and a bit more low key. But each of the islands has got a distinctively different identity, and very, very particularly difficult for Ibiza, which in the absence of knowing what's going to happen on the clubbing front next year. I mean, there's no question, you can't argue. Sometimes it's almost like the elephant in the room when you talk about it with people in the Ibiza government, or if I was to converse with people in the Ibiza government, where they don't like to admit that the clubs are such a draw, but the evidence is there to be seen. How many people if you think on a typical night in mid-July through to August, there are probably 30,000, 40,000 people spread across the clubs. That's a gigantic market, 7 nights a week. So nobody could possibly deny that that's a huge part of the appeal of Ibiza. It's the first question people ask when. So I think Ibiza's got more to worry about than Mallorca does, because Mallorca has a broader base of appeal. You can go to Mallorca if you're still really worried about COVID then, and I stress that I feel that people have been made a little bit more frightened than they actually should be. But if you are particularly worried, you go and rent a villa, stay in a relatively sort of insular environment, and you wouldn't see the lack of nightlife as having significantly dented the quality of your holiday, but the same couldn't be said for Ibiza.
So let's talk about excessive tourism then, because obviously this is the big thing. This was the bill that the government brought out in January. It was made law in February. The streets of Punta Ballena, the street in Palau de Palma, the street in San Antonio, basically, were basically saying that bars and if there were clubs in there, they couldn't do happy hours, they couldn't do 2-for-1s, they couldn't offer special drinks packages, whatever it was. And I think because when I was working in Paris, we were actually part of the excessive tourism, funnily enough, and we actually embraced it. We thought, to be honest with you, it doesn't work against us, it actually works for us, because all of a sudden we're not actually giving any drink away anymore. People are going to have to buy it. So in reality, it didn't really make a difference to us. And I spoke to quite a few bar owners, and they said, "No, listen, we'll get on with it. We want." But then, obviously, COVID hit, and then once the lockdown had sort of relented, and then there was this opportunity for the bars to open, all of a sudden, there was this problem that was obviously in the papers. The group of guys that came out of one of the bars jumped on a car and everything else, but it was an isolated incident. As far as I can see, as far as I'm made aware, what people might not know is that all the bars were told they had to shut their doors at 2 o'clock, and there was nothing else to be open. So these guys have been drinking. Some of them might be drinking all day. Who knows? But once you stop something and there's nowhere else to go, what are they going to do? Well, they might be a little bit rowdy, but at that point, you would think that the police would be around. The police would just, at the time I'm told, there weren't many police around, and it was just let to run, and that's when it all happened. So my point here is, what do you think? What are they going to be able to do? Because they can't just keep that street shut for the rest of the time. It's going to have to open again, But what is the, the answer here?
I mean, there's you have to address it in many different respects. I guess the notion of not having sort of 2-for-1s and happy hours is reasonable. Bearing in mind that Spanish drinks measures are very strong anyway compared to the way they are in the UK.
Yeah.
I think having DJ'd in many small towns, both in the UK and abroad, where everything shuts at the same time, what do you see? People pouring out at the same time and fighting with one another. It's a very misguided idea to have a rigid and unrealistic closing time. It sounds great politically, and they did the same thing in the West End of San Antonio. I think it was last summer, made them all shut at 3. Mm-hmm. But actually, it doesn't make the situation better. It makes it worse because then you've got everybody out at the same time. But it's kind of politicians acting for headlines without actually using their brains. So that is not a good idea. But also just accept what a youth market is. You know, when I'm not going to use myself as an example because I've DJ'd abroad and that's been what most of my travelling is involved for my entire adult life. But most of my friends went to Magaluf when they were 16, or to Ibiza, or both. They were sort of semi-interchangeable. All of them went to Magaluf or to San Ann at first. Fast forward 5 years, they were coming back and staying in 5-star hotels because they liked the place. They didn't necessarily want that sort of hotel. Fast forward another 5 to 10 years, coming back with their families, renting villas as exactly the sort of clientele that you would want, or that the government would want. Mm-hmm. You need to give people a taste of what your product is, your tourism product, at a relatively early age, and hope that kind of ignites the metaphorical blue touch paper, and they will remain bonded and emotionally attached to that location for the rest of their lives. And I think the evidence is there. Certainly anecdotally, the conversations I've had it with hundreds of people who said that, slightly more about Ibiza than Mallorca, but about both. So but then you need more police. I mean, I'm a little bit more au fait with San Antonio than I am with Mallorca, because although I spend more time in Mallorca than I do in Ibiza, I spend a bit more time in San Antonio when I'm in Ibiza than I do in Magaluf. But there are far too few police in San Antonio. I hear it reported that there are far too few police here in Magaluf. I understand Spain's come through a crisis. There's a shortage of police in the UK. They're recruiting heavily now, actually, which is probably one of the reasons why lockdown wasn't enforced so heavily in the UK. But my God, by all accounts, when lockdown had to be enforced in Spain, there were police on every street corner. Yeah. So if you're capable of enforcing lockdown, you should actually have a presence, a deterrent presence, understanding and respecting the fact that you're dealing with young people who are probably, some of whom are going on their first holidays, some of whom are going away from their parents for the first time, going out with their friends for the first time, can't handle their drinking, but they're not bad people. They are your market potentially for the rest of their lives. Mm. Respect that, put some police on the streets, make them concerned to, and if you have to sort of enforce with those police, because the Spanish police are a little bit, dare I say it, better at enforcing or less afraid to enforce than they are in the UK, within reason, then enforce that. But understand what a youth market, what a blessing it is to have a youth market. It's not something that is the unpleasant underbelly of Balearic tourism. Mm-hmm. It is the thing that ignites the passion for it in the first instance. And I'm sure the same goes for the German market. I mean, I'm pleased that this has got nothing to do with being anti-British, because the same rhetoric about, obviously, the German tourist market as a percentage of Mallorcan tourism is even greater than the British market, unlike Ibiza, where the British market is the biggest by some distance. And the areas of sort of Arenal / Playa de Palma, which is the sort of equivalent to Magaluf, almost virtually the same distance in the other direction, which I believe was something that was actually organised in the 60s as a sort of post-war way of keeping kind of the Germans and the Brits apart, which is quite an interesting story. Mm. But, the same applies. I spent a lot of time in Germany, and actually, I actually think British and Germans are quite similar culturally. The media don't like you to believe that, but I really do believe that. Younger Germans and younger British are culturally quite similar, so like doing the same things, like getting drunk. And I'm absolutely sure that the same situation applies to the German youth market. Yes, they come and get drunk. Yes, you could find isolated incidents where they misbehave. But look at the number of German number plates that you see all over Mallorca, particularly in southwest Mallorca. Mm-hmm. When did they go to Mallorca for the first time? How did they get the Mallorca bug? They would have come here when they were young. They would have probably had a holiday that part of which is completely blotted from the memory banks because they were drunk. But is that necessarily a bad thing? I don't believe so. I think it's a positive that you encourage people to come and have a good time.
You mentioned obviously the English and the Germans, and in fact, obviously the Germans are the most visited the country that comes here, followed by the UK, and actually followed by Spain is the third. Actually, they're the three main countries, and it's interesting that right now you mentioned earlier on about illegal raves and people going places where they shouldn't be and everything else. That's happening right now with the resident population of Spain right now. Here in Mallorca, we're seeing that people are going to, illegal raves, botellons as they're called here pretty much, you know what I mean? That's happening because you're not offering the nightlife to the people because you've closed everything.
Yeah.
So there's where the problem is, if you have them in a particular place, you can look after them. As you say, police is obviously the big thing here. You police them, that they leave at a certain time, they all go home and everything else. Right now, you've got a situation is that it's pretty much do what you want. And now the police are running around because in theory there's not enough of them to go around to cover the whole island to stop these things happening. Whereas if you had them in the places where the nightlife is, you could maybe police it better.
Yeah, and I don't think you would necessarily even need to stop things going on. You just have a presence.
Yeah.
Because I think to a British sort of kid, the Spanish look, the Guardia especially dressed in green, look quite sort of militaristic compared to British police. But if you don't police it, I mean, it starts and ends with policing, doesn't it, really?
I agree. Right, let's finish. So let's finish on a positive. You're obviously going to do these gigs. Let's see how that goes. But your sort of future, how you see the future of nightclubbing, gigging, holidaying, particularly.
It'll all be back. It'll all be back. Whether there is the silver bullet of a vaccine, or whether there is a combination of factors like very rapid, very efficient, very widespread testing and more drugs that stop the mortality rate of COVID, so it becomes no more risky than flu, which I think is quite likely. Mm-hmm. And I think that its dangers, whilst undoubted, one only needs to look at the number of fatalities, have been overstated. And I don't say that with any disrespect to those who've lost loved ones, but it's if you're under 50, and I'll go back to the quote, if you're under 50 in 2020, you stood more chance of dying in an accident. So I'm not belittling COVID, I'm not saying it's not important, I'm not saying we should pay no attention to it, but there are workarounds available, and that is how I see the future.
And if you want to big up your gigs, where are you gigging?
Oh God, I can't remember the names. It's just Manchester, Lancashire, Norwich, and Maidstone in the month of August 2020. Okay. All socially distanced. Hopefully, they will only be as far away as they have to be, because personally, as a performer, I like being close to the crowd. We just don't want the, what do they call it, the hairspray effect of people shouting at you. If you can't hear them, then maybe that'd be better. Who knows? But yeah, because obviously you get less people, you might be able to hear more, I suppose. But no, you'll have those headphones on, you won't hear anything. Listen, Jules, great to catch up with you. Thank you very much. Always interesting to talk to you, and I really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll catch up again, maybe once things start calming down again, and we'll find out a little bit more about what you do and everything else. It's nothing if it's not interesting.
Good to see you.
Cheers.
Take care.